How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast. I'm going to keep this intro as short and sweet as I possibly can because this episode actually went way longer than we were anticipating, but that's what happens when you're having a great conversation with one of your greatest friends of all time, Midnight Miles Ackroyd. And today we are discussing a lot of films that we have changed our opinion on over the years, films that have grown on us over the years, and just films that we're looking forward to rewatching if we haven't rewatched them in a long time. So I hope you guys enjoy the ride with us. If you guys haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you know when I post new videos. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get the show, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button over there as well and leaving me a rating and a review. So with that, we're just going to get right to the episode. So now let's get spooky. Alright, everybody, welcome back to the House of Horror. It's definitely been a fat minute since we've done one of these episodes, so I had to bring one of the heavy hitters back on, Midnight Miles. What's going on, my man?
Hey, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. It has been quite a while. A lot's changed, I think, in both of our lives.
My life is pretty much the same.
No, you have to,
Well, what has changed? How have I changed as a person since the last time we did this?
You're a freaking teacher now, bro.
I was a teacher last time we did this, Kat.
I don't think you really,
I was getting into this
about it too much.
I do have a full year of teaching under my belt.
See? There you go.
At the collegiate level. For some reason, they let me teach college students.
Well.
But it is what it is. Some of them actually listen to the show, so shout out to you guys for sticking around. Miles, I would say, to tell the story, because Miles had a hell of a weekend this weekend, you guys. Tied Down Fest in Detroit. But Miles' favorite thing to do is to tell a bunch of stories before we start recording when they're actually phenomenal podcast stories. But he just told me all the stories.
I don't know if all the...
Listen, you're talking about people getting stitches in the face, fucking Justin Tripp's haircut. Can you just...
Justice Tripp.
Justice.
Edit that part out. We don't want our listeners thinking we don't know.
I'm losing my hardcore crap. Holy shit.
You gotta come out of mass retirement, bro. Yeah, I don't know when this is coming out, but it is
This will probably come out in like 2 days if we're recording it.
Okay, all right. We gotta keep... I never know when things are coming out, but... Yeah, I just got back from Tied Down Fest, year 2. I've been to both years. It was a blast. It went from being 1 day to 2 days this year, which is weird because I was more exhausted day 1 than I was yesterday. Makes no sense, but...
well, because you were acclimated to it. Like, the first day is just kind of the shock. Second day, you're like, all right, I know what I'm getting myself into. I've been in the trenches. My girlfriend's getting hit in the face with beer cans full speed.
Yeah, she did get, during Trapped Under Ice, get hit with a giant fucking beer. So, I guess, I don't know how many people have listened to this. I don't remember the last episode I was on, do you?
It was something in October. I can't remember.
October?
About the release schedule, I'm not sure which episode came out the latest, but...
Yeah, but a lot's changed. I guess we're not going to talk about it too much, but on the podcast, I think I've been known for being inebriated on various things over the years, but I'm actually now currently sober. I feel like that's a big thing. So I probably won't sound as fucked up to everyone who's listening now. I think that's maybe a good thing. Maybe lost a few listeners because of me over the years. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think we've lost any listeners because of you. I'll say this to Miles, and I've told him this off the podcast too, so this isn't that radical of a statement. He's had some of the more drunk conversations I've had with him now that he's sober than when he was drinking. Like, Miles just walks in the house, and I don't know, he has like this weird like post-nut clarity, only it's like post-drinking clarity. He just comes in, he sees like he fucking like saw God or something. He like walks in, he's like, man, like, I don't know, like, and he's saying all this crazy shit.
I'm a pretty I don't know. I'm extreme enough, I guess, in my own way. I'm not gonna go into it here. I'm embarrassed. I can tell I'm blushing as I'm staring at your 3 beautiful cats. Hey, that's a change. You have another animal in the house now.
Binky was on the last podcast I did solo for the Skinamarink review. So, update, since this is the first one coming out since the Skinamarink review, Binky is still with us. He is fixed. He is vaguely getting along with the other cats.
Vaguely.
As in, they tolerate each other. Like, they're not, like, hanging out all the time and all that kind of stuff, but they get along decently enough. So, that is the Binky update. Still want to name him Skinamarink, because that's what we were on the way to the theater when we saw him, so...
What could you use for a, like a short of that, like shortening the name, like a nickname for Skinamarink? What do you think is a good nickname for that?
I don't know.
I don't know. You got nothing? I got nothing either. Well, speaking of that, there's been a lot of stuff that's come out this year already with horror and stuff like that. I mean, I can't believe we're already into June. I'm sure we've talked about it, as we like to talk about how fucking old we're getting and aging and all these things and how fast time is going. But fuck, this year's gone fast. What do you think? The past 5 months, you know?
It's gone very fast. I feel like, ironically, I talked to you about, like, this semester at school just being kind of difficult for me, like, getting into the vibe of teaching again, because, like, the first semester I had double the kids I had the second semester.
Right.
So, like, I felt like the beginning of the year was really dragging, but then as soon as I started, like, vibing with the class and stuff, the year just started to flow, like, rather quickly. So now, yes, it is insane that it's already June.
I think in Ohio, I think we've talked about enough. That's where we're listening from. Probably a lot of listeners in Ohio. I feel like as soon as the weather starts to get nice, I blink and then it actually is October, November, and then it's all shit again. And then you're like in the middle of January, and January feels like 4 months. Thank God this past year didn't. This year, honestly, winter, everything has been great, but there's some where it's like you feel like you've been in winter for a year. But we were very lucky
this year we went all out with the winter preparations. We got brand new shovels. We bought a snow blower, and it did not snow at all this year. We got like a little light fuzz snow. But, like, in years previous, like, we were, like, shoveling all the time and it was a pain in the ass. And then this year, that's probably why the year feels like it was so fast. Because, like, it was, like, kind of winter, and then all of a sudden it's just, like, hot.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it even had we had a fucking few weird weeks in April where it was, like, 70, and then it was 35 and snowing again for, like, 2 hours. And then all of a sudden we came out of that, had, like, 2 weeks of rain, and, like, all right. And then it was warm, and then it did the classic Ohio, oh no, we're going to drop 10 degrees and stay there, and now it's kind of, but it's been a good year. I know we're losing listeners talking about the fucking weather, but we're old men now. I mean, we're starting to get well into our 30s, ripe into our old age, but what else has been going on in the world of horror and House of Horrors, huh?
Like, there's been a ton of films coming out. There's probably too many to go in depth into for this, but like some films, like, I mean, Scream 6 obviously came out this year.
Did really well.
We saw Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey together. Absolutely abysmal.
It's my worst Letterboxd film of the year, but God, I enjoyed myself with how stupid it was.
It was Miles' favorite film of all time. He was flexing incredibly hard the whole film.
It had some of the worst. Oh God, we're not going to do a whole podcast on Winnie the Pooh for Blood and Honey, but check it out. I think anyone who's a horror fan should check it out. I'm sober, and I recommend you do substances while watching it. But do them responsibly in your home, and hopefully with your kids in bed and not watching this horrible fucking film. But anyways,
I'm trying to think what else came out this year. I mean, I guess I can check on Letterboxd.
Some stuff. Here we go. We're okay. We're into the new year. We're doing Letterboxd live on the air, trying to figure out what happened this year.
So this year I'm actually doing something different. I've only seen 7 films that came out this year, but I'm actually ranking them like in a list, like as I'm watching them. Like, oh, I like this better than this. So right now, for some reason, I have Skinamarink as the best one I saw in theaters this year.
Oh wow.
But Renfield came out this year. I thought that was
Renfield knew exactly what it was. I had a very big argument with my dear friend Dylan Nemi. He's probably not going to listen to this, but about how do you...
Side note, I think of Dylan Nemi anytime a fucking Coheed song comes on shuffle. Like the other day, fucking Devil in Jersey City came on, and I was like, oh, somewhere in South Carolina, Dylan's just like levitating inexplicably.
I feel like maybe a discussion for another podcast, but Renfield was very good. Evil Dead Rise came out. That kind of been anticipated
I forgot to put that in my ranking.
I think I liked it. I think I was more generous than I guess some of our mutual friends and you. I mean, I liked it. It was a serviceable sequel. It had some great special effects, but I think it was kind of missing a little bit of the soul that the Evil Dead series is known for. But I still think it was a pretty fun time. Infinity Pool. I really liked Infinity Pool. Probably one of the better films I've seen this year. I really liked Boo is Afraid. I thought that was a very good film, very heavy film. I'd like to see it again.
That's another one I haven't seen because every time I wanted to go see it, I was like, fuck, I just don't have time for a 3-hour movie on a Tuesday.
It's a lot to digest too. Like you leave and I'm like, man, I kind of need to watch that again already. This year's been fun. And before we go into some other stuff, some bigger topics, but this year at the theater, I've had a lot of fun. I saw Cocaine Bear. I saw, even for what Winnie the Pooh was, I had a great time. Renfield was super fun. I went and saw that fucking very generic Knights of the Zodiac based on the anime live action, and it brought me back to my Power Ranger watching days as a child. Scream 6 was fun for what it was. I mean, honestly, this year...
I thought Scream 6 was actually, really good. Like, that might be my second favorite.
It's one of
the franchise.
Yeah, it's one of the best sequels. It's insane to talk about how the 6th entry in a series, and it could be really that good. And you know me, Scream's not one of... It's kind of in the middle.
He's a Scream hater.
No, it's in the middle of my horror franchise.
It's one step above Child's Play for Miles.
It is one step above Child's Play's fine. But anyways, as we're sitting here on our Letterboxd live on this podcast, is there anything you're looking forward to the rest of the year for horror? Is there anything, just something that's really you've been waiting for?
For the rest of the year, I'm trying to think what else is coming out. Scream 6 was the big one for me this year, and Renfield. Like, stuff that's already came out was what I was looking forward to.
I think we're all looking forward to Evil Dead. I think that just the fact that a new Evil Dead film was coming out was kind of like... It's not one where you're like, oh, Scream 6, there's already 6 of them out. Granted, yes, there are the 3 and there's a remake, but the space between those, the 40 years of that franchise, I mean, you're not getting one like we got Scream 5 a year and a half before Scream 6, not even a full year and a half, to be honest. So it's like it's been a decade since the last Evil Dead film, which I rewatched 2013, the unrated version, before I went and watched Evil Dead Rise, and God, that film aged well. I'd recommend watching the unrated version, just having those couple little story details they cut out really flesh the film out better. But I know we're getting off on a tangent here. I will say for the rest of the year, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what David Gordon Green's going to do with his Exorcist sequel, because that's supposed to come out in the October season.
Oh, you know what I'm looking forward to?
Very curious.
I forgot. Okay, so Salem's Lot comes out this year finally.
That was going to be my next talking point.
I totally forgot about it. Very excited for that. We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but I think we both plan on seeing like Boogeyman within the next week.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to watching that finally. I don't know. This year's been a relatively good year in general for films, not just horror films. Like
Yeah,
I saw the Mario Brothers movie. I thought that was phenomenal.
I'm gonna see it. I haven't seen it yet.
But yeah, this year in general, just the stuff that I've seen, except for like a few like stinkers, it's been actually a pretty good year for me for film.
I feel, again, fun this year. I haven't seen a lot of stuff that you're like, wow, like you know what I mean, like in regards to like I'm absolutely blown away that's going to be this and that, but I've had so much fun going to the theater. And I think after these last few years with the pandemic and everything that's gone on and so much going on in the world, a lot of turmoil, a lot of other things like that, that to be able to use entertainment for what it's for, but also stuff that I say is fun. Like it wasn't complete dumb fun. You know, there might have been some intentional camp and humor and trash, but I mean, it was kind of like giving you the old wink and nod. You know what I mean? I knew what it was. It was well made. I hope the rest of the year. I mean, even the tentpole, some of the big stuff we talked about, the new Spider-Man animated film. I think it's just going to be a really fun year to go to cinemas, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some hidden gems. You know, I mean, some stuff that is not on my radar yet. That's just going to blow me away later in the year. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk about that when we get to October with some of your stuff.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, there's a lot of shit coming out. Like, I mean, like stuff that I'm only like vaguely excited for. Like the new Insidious is coming out this year.
That trailer looked good though. Did you watch the trailer?
I have not seen the trailer.
The trailer actually shocked me. I'm pretty into it based on that trailer.
And like hinting at like some stuff we're gonna be like talking about later. Like Insidious is a franchise that's been very hit or miss for me over the years, but it's stuff that I want to revisit. Just similar to some of the things we're gonna be talking about a little bit later on in this episode. So kind of a little bit of a spoiler for our main topic, which you've probably read the title already, so you know what we're going to be talking about in this episode, but we haven't introduced it yet so far canonically. And Miles actually came up with the idea for this one, so I'll let him kind of take the reins on introducing the topic for this. Maybe a little like mini-series we'll be doing, because obviously once we introduce what this is, there's going to have to be a follow-up. So I'll just let you kind of have at it.
Usually with me, there's always a yin and yang, a side to each coin where I like to do a best and worst. I think they're good talking points. I think sitting down and talking, I really appreciate when we get together and do this, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm going to revisit this based on that. I mean, the fact they're doing these podcasts, another thing, we've been doing these podcasts together now for almost 4 years on and off. Which is pretty. I think that's pretty crazy because I know this is the first episode of kind of working towards the Halloween season, which will be here before we know it. But we've done a few franchises, and I'm not saying we have to say what we're doing this year, but we are going to be doing our 4th franchise together.
We have had some requests to do franchises, so I'm just throwing it out there. Everyone that wants us to do Scream, there's inevitably going to be more Scream movies, so I'd rather hold off on that until it's done. But the one we are doing... do you want to say it the first time? I think we hold off on it.
Hold off, okay, all
But
right.
it may or may not be done. I'm actually not sure what they're doing with the franchise. As far as I'm concerned, the main, like, canonical thing has been done, and now they've just been doing kind of like spin-offs and prequels and stuff.
Right.
If you could piece together what I'm talking about, it was a huge franchise during its day, so if you want to do your research, you can probably figure out what we're talking about. But
I will say 1 or 2 quick lines. Hopefully I won't spoil it, but this is one that I have wanted to do for a while because some of these I have not seen probably since around when they came out, and I've probably only watched most of them 2 times. So I'm very curious, and I actually rewatched a couple of them last year, and I was kind of shocked. And one of them that I would have put in high regard, I think there's going to be a lot of... this is going to be one I might watch multiple of these films multiple times before we do this podcast, because I'm very curious. It's a lengthy series, right? If I can say that, that's all I'll say.
You know, I've tried so hard, and I've got so far. Is that the lyric or whatever? I've tried to rewatch this franchise a few times. I've only made it to the first few, and I'm like, okay, these are getting real bad real quick. But
I will say I listened to a couple podcasts earlier this year that talked about this franchise, and I was kind of shocked that their opinions were very similar to mine, which I know sometimes everyone likes to think my opinions are extreme, but anyways, we'll talk about that more when we get there, but I'm excited to get there in the upcoming months. Now we're already off on a tangent, but I will, I guess, introduce something that I brought. Me and Buddy, a little behind the scenes. I always kind of
behind the screams.
Ooh, okay, I like that. There we go. We got to keep it on brand. I like to randomly send Buddy things like, hey, I got maybe 3 to 5 ideas. Like, what do you think of this?
He likes to do elevator pitches all the time for the podcast.
And then we end up doing it. We might do the podcast 6 months later or whatever. But one that I've noticed, as I'm spoiling it doesn't matter, Buddy can see. I do have it on Notepad in front of me. I like to keep it as old school as possible. I like to pretend it's 1983 at all times. I've noticed in the past, probably 5 to 10 years, I've been rewatching things more. As in regards to, I used to watch things maybe 2 or 3 times, and that's being generous on some films, and just not get back to them unless it's a random on TV watch or it's on at somebody's house or yada yada. But I've noticed within past 5 to 10 years, I'm starting to almost have annual to semi-annual rewatches of maybe maybe a couple dozen films, and been fortunate to see some things in theaters. We do have the Art Institute Theater here that kind of does a little bit of stuff with horror. We have a couple Cinema Wasteland that will show some stuff. We've had some other odds and ends over the past 10 years with horror. Cleveland's done a really good job with kind of catering to that. It's probably one of the reasons I stay. But so some of these I've seen in theaters, and it kind of changed my opinion on it too. But the topic and the following topic will be 3 films. We're going to just do 3 to kind of keep it brief, so we're not getting, I'm not going to have 10 and have a 4-hour fucking podcast or something. We'll save the 4-hour shit for the franchise stuff. But 3 films that when I initially watched them, or we initially watched them, I should say, maybe we liked them, we enjoyed them, but then we watched them again, maybe we're a little bit older, maybe we watched them again even closer to the age we are now, or present day, and you can just appreciate more and how much these have grown with us, and how maybe you didn't think this would be one of your favorite films when you first watched it, and over the years it really has become up there, and it's almost like a comfort. For me, the 3 that I picked have almost become like a comfort food over the years, and I didn't expect that.
So I'm going to be cheating a little bit with my list, and we'll get into it a little bit. But I guess, for mine, because we just decided, we finalized doing this, maybe a couple seconds before we started recording. So my list...
I love how you give it all away.
So my list isn't completely set in stone. So mine is more so stuff that maybe I didn't like upon my first viewing, or, I thought it was just fine. But over the years, some of them I have rewatched, some of them I even haven't. But the more I think about it, it's that wasn't as bad as I thought it was, or I like this more than I did on my initial rewatch for one reason or another. Before we dive into it, I have one more tangent. I can't believe we didn't bring this up at the beginning, but we are 2-time horror. What is it? Trivia champions.
Yeah, right now we are actually the current horror trivia champions of Cleveland, Ohio. Fight us if you want to come at us.
July 16th. If you want to challenge us for the belts at No Class.
Sunday brunch night. I think they're still calling it brunch of the Trivial Dead, maybe. What's his name? Cousin Bobby, right?
Cousin Bobby.
Cousin Bobby's been doing it. We've been to 2. We won both times.
We smacked the floor both times.
We smacked the floor, which was surprising because the first time especially there was quite a few teams. And there were teams of people between 4 and 6 people, and it's just been us with one of our significant others each time. So, I mean, but the thing is, it's always good to have a third mind because they always come in with one or two questions,
that you
or they
don't
maybe,
know, yeah.
or maybe they just give you enough of a like quick discussion that it hits that spark in your mind and we're good to go.
And it's happened both times with both of those significant others on various different things. So.
Yes. So yeah, that is a great thing to bring up actually. So yeah, we can pat ourselves on the back, but I would love to see I'd love to see even some of your students, if they think they know, show up. We'll take them down. Bring their parents too. We'll take them down. Don't worry about it. Anyways, you have any other tangents, real quick?
I have no other tangents, real quick. No,
right. We'll save some tangents for another podcast.
I'm sure something will come up during the discussion. That's a tangent.
We're likely gonna go slightly off topic, but I mean we'll be all right. It's usually what we do.
Listen, I say this all the time. People come to Buddy's House of Horror for Buddy. I'm the host. I'm the draw. You can get all your horror podcasts all over. You're watching this for me and Miles. So
hey, thanks for putting me in there. I like being the sidekick, you know. Anyways, do you want? We talked about this, but
we can do it either way. I have a list of stuff.
What do you prefer? As you just said, they come for you. Do you want to do one of us does our three, or do you want to go back and forth?
Let's go back and forth, just to kind of
classic Buddy's House of Horrors.
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah. Classic run through. All right. Do you want to go first?
I think you go first.
Me go first.
So then that way, if I want to change my answer, like you said, the conversation might kind of spark some memories. Yeah, because Miles said he came with a notepad. I just quickly scrolled through my Letterboxd during the introduction to this podcast.
Just a couple things. I actually this year, this will be a mini tangent, but it fits in. I've been listening to finally a lot more podcasts. I feel like the bug finally bit me, where I found, I guess, some like the right podcasts where like I feel like it's like a feeling out. Like you have to find something where you're like, oh, I gravitate towards this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The right host, the right group of people. I mean, and I've been finding more and more. So I listen to them and they talk about their preparation and all this stuff, and I'm like, holy shit! Like we've done preparation in the past. I mean, I think our Nightmare on Elm Street.
When we do the big series, we always have
our Nightmare on Elm Street was good. I went back. I know it's bad, and it's just like listening to your own band. You're not supposed to do it, but I listened to our series rankings, and I was like, you know what? I thought I did way fucking worse on that. But anyways, again, tangent over. But I'm gonna try to keep how many episodes I'm on this year with you. I'm gonna try to do a little research and try to sound like maybe I know a fucking thing or two. Benefit of being sober and needing to fucking fill my mind with stuff. But anyways, so my first film is one that probably, I don't know, of the three, I think I liked it maybe the most on initial watch in regards compared to the other two. You know what I mean? Like I did enjoy it, but I've watched it multiple times now, definitely within the past decade. I didn't see it until I was probably around 20 years old because it wasn't... We were at the right time where DVD and Blu-ray hadn't really caught up to like VHS releases and stuff yet. So there was a strange probably 10 years, 15 years between, I would say, maybe 96 to honestly almost 2010, where there was some stuff that was just fucking hard to find. Pre-streaming, stuff like this. So I picked Night of the Demons from 1988. I think it's one of the last, I'll use the word great for me, films of the 80s. I think 88 had a bunch of gems. Kind of 89, a lot of things all kind of fell apart. I mean, it's almost like a lot of the filmmakers were out of ideas. The MPAA had come and just slashed everything to pieces. I think the 80s was starting to lose its identity. Now, granted, I was 1 year old in 1989, but I've watched a lot of stuff from the year 1989, and it just seems like they've kind of lost everything that made the 80s great up until that point. And then obviously, you know, we went in and we've talked about in this podcast numerous times with 90s horror and how the first few years of the 90s was pretty bad overall. Like as far as there were some great gems, But I mean, shit, there might have been only like 10 a year. So I mean, so it just wasn't where in like, let's say 1985, if you probably looked and then went even further into like straight to video stuff, I mean, you probably had 100 fucking great films like, or like entertaining films that came out that year. But have you seen Night of the Demons? I guess I should.
I've seen it. It's been a very long time since I've seen Night of the Demons.
Okay. So the whole premise of Night of the Demons, kids are getting together for a party, which in the 80s, I mean, I think we speak for both of us. Anytime there's like some sort of party gone wrong film, it's probably gonna be a good time.
Yeah.
Right? The 80s.
Obviously.
So a few different groups of kids, it kind of hits all the, I hate to use the word stereotypes, but stereotypes across the board, get together at this old, abandoned, I guess it's a mortuary if I'm remembering right. I'm going to be a little fuzzy with the details, internet, so don't castrate me too bad on that. But they're getting together, they're going to have a party, it's way off the beaten path. It's on this kind of like cursed land. There's like a walls like built up all the way around the place. So once things kind of go haywire, it's kind of a nice haunted house film basically at its core. But like you can't get out. You can't escape the property. You can get out into like the courtyard of the property, but they can't seem to escape this overall haunting of like the whole area. The thing I've noticed over the years is just, I think it hits all of my sensibilities personally, just more and more. I mean, great music throughout, tons of like rock, all this stuff. It's got the sex, the violence, insane practical effects, some great on-camera practical effects. Probably the one it's most known for is the lipstick going into the nipple, which if you haven't seen it, I mean, lipstick going into a nipple, I feel like, come on, that's got to pique your interest. I guess I would say, as we were talking about Evil Dead, I feel like if you're a fan of the Evil Dead, wouldn't you say that this is probably something
it's right up your alley.
Right up your alley.
The only thing about Night of the Demons, like, when you're like looking at it on lists, like the biggest problem like I see like looking back is just like it's a generic name. And, like, there's a lot of stuff that's called Night of the Demon or Night of the Demons. Yeah. And it's just, like, it kind of gets, like, lost in the shuffle. It's definitely, like, a hidden gem. Like, I know a lot of, like, horror fans, like, know about it, but it's definitely not something that, like, your casual person is gonna have seen it, I guess.
I know that there was a nice Blu-ray release a handful of years ago, so at least it's back on video. I think the first time I watched it was, of course, I've talked to us on a couple of other ones, but thank God for FearNet and its streaming of a handful of films a week. Thank God on my laptop computer I was able to get stuff like Night of the Demons, Night of the Creeps, I think even My Bloody Valentine for the first time. I mean, stuff that, like, now it's like, oh, we have this mega special edition with behind the scenes and all this. But this shit really was gone. We grew up, especially me being a few years older, grew up at a time where technology and everything was changing. Physical media was starting to fail for the first time, but streaming and stuff wasn't up there yet. So it was kind of like, it was just a weird time when I really think back on it and trying to get some of these things you could now read about online, but you couldn't find them. I mean, or if you did, once YouTube started, it would be the worst. You couldn't even watch it, essentially. And it's not like now where you could cast YouTube to your TV. I mean, you're watching a shitty version on a small computer, and it's more frustrating than actually trying to watch the film. So, but I mean, notes on it. I mean, I think just a great haunted house film, which I feel like in the 80s now at this point, obviously comedies being, put more into horror and stuff like that. This is comedic, but I feel like there weren't, to my knowledge, in the late 80s, hopefully this is why we do this, hopefully maybe you can correct me, I'm trying to think of like really any like haunted house maybe to an extent.
I mean, there was like Spookies and shit like that.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which I actually watched recently. And, like, I didn't realize it was, like, 2 films put together. Like, they, like, ran out of money or something, and they
Yeah.
just were kind of like piecing shit together. I kind of think it was like underrated. Like, I mean, it's not that great or anything, but people have ripped it apart.
I need to rewatch that. Actually, I'll put that on. That's a good thing. See, that's why we do this. But anyways,
yeah, the haunted house. I mean, you obviously had your like cabin in the woods shit. I mean, like you had Evil Dead 2 around that time and stuff like that.
But you know what I'm saying? More of like a haunted mansion or a haunt. It's not, because the one thing that this film that I also enjoy that it does is it feels, the set pieces and the house feel big, actually. Like, there's a ton of locations within the house. Towards the end of the film, they're using walkways, balconies. They use the roof. They use, like I said, almost like the garden area outside. I mean, they're moving around a lot. Another note that I put is, to add on to that, you're never bored in this film, which is excellent. It's paced. In my opinion, there's always something happening. You know what I mean? There's always something happening from the beginning where they're getting to the party. There's some comedic like moments where they're in the store and the girls are stealing stuff. There's the car ride and they're all, you know, fucking with each other and doing that. Like, it doesn't take long to get into what it really is, and then it never slows down after that.
Yeah. Like I said, like, I did enjoy the film when I watched it. I do feel like it gets, like, overshadowed by, like, a lot of stuff that was going on. Because, like, it's a horror comedy. Like, it's not as funny as Return to the Living Dead. And, like, stuff like that. Like, I think it's, like, kind of like a lesser tier kind of horror comedy in that regard. But it's definitely one that I want to rewatch as well. So
it's hard because it's very, like, with Return of the Living Dead, it's horror comedy, but I mean, a lot of it's straight up comedy. You know what I mean? It's just like the visuals are horror. Where there are some kind of tense scenes or like unsettling visuals, otherworldly visuals. Like, the demons in this look fucking evil. Like, I mean, they look, Angela, when she's fully transformed, I mean, pretty fucking evil looking. But then
you see her on the cover, like, with a fucking, like, grape on, whatever the hell it is. Like, you're like, this is goofy. But
it's I think too, as they were getting to the late 80s, the marketing for some of this stuff was all over the fucking place. I mean, it's not, I think the problem is too the quality of the stuff that was coming out in the late 80s. I think is another thing too. Like, I think a lot of people were just almost over horror, like oversaturated.
Yeah.
But I mean, besides that, it kind of, like I said, the makeup effects fucking kill it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I believe last time I checked, it's on Peacock.
It probably is, yeah.
Actually, so which
there's
I
a
thought
lot
was
of
great.
Universal shit or like Universal bots on there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, again, shout out to Peacock, you can sponsor us, but Peacock has a ton of great old horror. I mean, I hate to say that the 80s are old, but I mean, 30 some years ago, I mean, yeah, we're starting to get there. But that's what I got for my first one, man. What do you think? Any final thoughts or anything like that?
No final thoughts on that one. Mine's the first one I'll say for my list is around that time period-ish. And as I said, it's my show, so I'm cheating a little bit. I'm going to include a trilogy.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
As one entry.
Okay, I like that.
A trilogy of films encased in a franchise of films. And the three of these I've rewatched in the past year. They're a lot better than I remember. A film franchise that has grown on me is the Thorn trilogy.
Okay.
I rewatched, famously, I ranked Halloween 5 as the lowest Halloween film.
Oh, I have something in my notes.
I
pulled up my...
He pulled up his notes.
I'm pulling out my notes. I listened back to those podcasts, and I purposely sat and wrote down my list from those podcasts. I didn't get to Nightmare on Elm Street yet, but I also... Where did I put Halloween 5? I put Halloween 5 at number 7 of 10. Now, I'll remind you, little flashback, we didn't include Season of the Witch. I fucking love Season of the Witch, but Buddy wanted just the Michael Myers ones. I get it, that's fine. So that's why it's at 7. It would be at 8. It might even be if I rewatched it. I don't know, I need to rewatch it. Anyways, I cut you off. Go ahead, continue. But I do have my list.
Thorn trilogy is underrated. It's grown on me a lot over the years. I mean, I always liked 4, but I didn't really realize until after rewatching it how much I love 4. Just right from the opening scene, like, it just sets the tone perfectly. Of course, this is bringing it back, sort of to the original formula. I mean, obviously 3 took a bit of a departure, but just the whole trilogy for me, I thought was way better than it was when I was watching it as a kid. Because even then, I knew it was not god tier cinema or anything, but and maybe it's part of the hindsight is 2020 thing, because I rewatched all of these after I watched Halloween Ends, which I famously was not a fan of.
I'm famously a huge fan of now, but that's another. We can go into that another time. But continue.
Did we ever talk? Oh yeah, we had you on for we talked about Halloween Ends, but it came out.
We had it with Dynamite and Jared, but I mean he pretty much screamed over me. That was I had a little bit of a burnout on podcasting last year, and I really last year was a rough year overall for me. And when I wasn't getting any enjoyment from doing that, that was kind of the one where I kind of was like, I don't know about this. I kind of like gave up. I couldn't do the. I understood. I felt bad for both of you guys, but I love it. I'm glad. Thankfully, I've listened to some other podcast people that love it. But anyways, I digress. We don't need to go into Halloween Ends in the middle of this, because we'll never get. We'll
never come out the other side.
Yeah, we'll be fucked. We'll lose every listener you've ever had. But anyways, continue.
I haven't rewatched the producer's cut yet.
Okay.
I rewatched the theatrical. So I am looking forward to rewatching the producer's cut. I've never seen it in high definition. I've only watched like the shitty bootlegs. So I'm curious to see how that goes. But as far as 4, 5, and 6, the original ones, I thought they were pretty good. I mean, I do still have some of the gripes that I have with 5. Like, I don't think they're truly as faithful to the characters as they should be, and the mask is pretty horrendous in it. But overall, like, I was never bored during any of them. I think they have a lot more creative ideas than I gave them credit for. Maybe unintentionally or not. Like, I don't know. Because, I mean, in part 5, they didn't know who the Man in Black was and stuff like that. So a lot of it's, like, unintentional. But go ahead.
I think, because I've been listening to Halloweenies podcast a lot. I've tried to get you, but anyways, I've listened to all their rankings and their stories and stuff. And I believe when they started Halloween 5, the script wasn't finished, was the big thing, which is ridiculous, but they started filming it. Yeah. So I think they didn't even have an ending when they started. So I feel like Halloween 5 was probably a pretty hard shoot. I'd imagine. Yeah. So some of those creative ideas might have been like at the midnight hour throwing whatever they could against the wall to try to get something that I guess would be accepted and finish it, but the 80s did that though. The 80s, I mean, that came out, that was 89, wasn't it? As much as I was just shitting on 89. Yeah. But again, Halloween 5, listening to the podcast earlier and now you talking about this, I definitely, like, especially for some reason 5, I need to go back and rewatch that again for sure.
Yeah. Like, the only thing I really don't like about it is the ending, and, like, there are some, like, parts that are a little iffy. Like, you can tell it's disjointed for sure. Mm. Not as disjointed as 6 can get. That must have been a hell of a shoot.
Right.
But regardless, like, I don't know if it's the nostalgia factor or just having, like, better hindsight, but it's definitely a film franchise that has been growing on me the past few years, so it's definitely something I've changed my opinion on, so...
Yeah, I'd like to... I did go back earlier this year. I'm ranking everything I watched this year on Letterboxd for the first time. A lot of times I don't rank rewatches, or I hadn't in the past.
Yeah.
I'm ranking everything I've seen. So Paramount Plus has all the Miramax ones, which are actually like Curse, H2O, Resurrection.
Yeah.
So I watched H2O. I watched Resurrection, and I fell asleep watching Curse, which I want to go back and finish that. But I famously, like, Curse is one of my favorites. So I mean, I think everyone knows how I feel about that. But side note, God, Resurrection was fucking even worse than, like, it's weird. It's weird because Resurrection did some things way better than I remember it doing, and did other things way worse than I remember it doing. I mean, it's weird because I like some of the Michael Myers parts in the film, but God, everything else surrounding it, any other human characters and any of the stuff is just so fucking bad. Like, talking about a disjointed film. Like, you watch one scene and it's like Michael Myers like stalking around the house. It's like actually like the lighting's like the mood's right, everything's good, and then it's someone being like, "Hey, baby, what time do those legs open?" Like 2 seconds later. So it's like it's rough. Like it's rough. How long has it been since you watched that one?
Resurrection?
Yeah.
A long time.
Long
time. Early college, I'd say, so probably like 10 years.
You should go back. Yeah. You should go back and rewatch that. I try to enjoy H2O more all the time. We've talked about this. I mean, everyone, still the consensus is that H2O is a top 3 Halloween film.
It's not the consensus.
It used to be more and more. Now that there's been more films, a little more time passed. But
I'll throw in an honorable mention. Before we watched Halloween Ends, I rewatched 2018 and Halloween Kills. Halloween Kills is way better than I remember it on the first watch. Second watch, I was like, all right, this goes in.
I've watched that whole trilogy multiple times now. As disjointed almost as each film is, kind of looking back, almost how I feel with the new Star Wars trilogy, I appreciate each film for what it was. Almost like if you look, like we talked about kind of on the other podcast, how I feel like almost that, like if you put all those ideas on paper and maybe flipped around some of the plot points and changed certain things, I think you could have a masterpiece of a trilogy.
If you would have put that Corey character in the first part or whatever,
or even beginning of Kills and built his character up
like
the whole
literally
film.
Like anything, like I don't know. I'm not gonna talk about Halloween Ends on this, but like did not like it either way. You got all right. So that was mine. You got your second one.
I do. Yeah. I'm glad we got off on a Halloween tangent. I appreciate it. My number 2 is one that initially, again, still really enjoyed, but I saw it a little bit after some of its contemporaries, and I also just I can't really remember the first time I saw it. I just know it was later. And I've been fortunate enough to own the Blu-ray now. I was fortunate enough to see it in theaters with one other very sweet old man. That was the only other person in the theater, unfortunately. And just have some other rewatches. I've actually shown this to a couple people for the first time. So this has really been something that I've almost really, when I talked about the semi-annual, and when I even talked about doing this podcast, this was the first film that came to mind. And that is Joe Dante's The Howling.
Okay.
So
that just came out on Shudder like 2 days ago. What's today, the 5th? So June 1st, Howling was on Shudder, and I was like, shit, good. I should rewatch this.
You should.
I haven't seen that one since, because I was in the dorm. So that was sophomore year of college was the last time I've seen that. So it's been 12 years, 11 years since I've seen that. It's been a while. So I like The Howling.
The Howling, infamously and unfortunately, came out right after American Werewolf in London, and there was competition between the two films, famously between the two special effects artists that worked on it, Rick Baker and Rob Bottin, who was a protege of Rick Baker. It actually cost them their friendship, their working relationship. So kind of interesting behind the scenes, especially because Rick Baker was initially supposed to work on The Howling, but got out of, somehow, I don't know the exact story again, got out of his contract, wanted to work with John Landis, who already was, I mean, Joe Dante had done some films and was starting to build a name, but he wasn't on the level of John Landis yet and everything
he
had done. Not yet.
He'd get there, but not yet.
He did that. And honestly, probably now, with more modern audiences, more people have seen more Joe Dante films than they've seen Landis.
Landis is borderline canceled now, so.
Yeah. I guess that's true. Anyways, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole either. But I'm in love American Werewolf in London until I die. I'm sorry. It's just, I mean, it's in my top 10 forever. But saw American Werewolf in London at a very young age. I talked about it on the first podcast we ever did together way back on, like we talked about almost 4 years ago. Owning that and Night of the Living Dead in the same day. I mean, that kind of like those were two that continued, like kind of just set my interest in horror ablaze, and I was ready to go. But saw The Howling, read about the issues I just talked about before I ever saw it, so I kind of knew a little bit. Knew it was a big practical effects film, and obviously I'd seen some trailers and stuff, so I was excited. But I think when I saw it, it was hard because I was comparing American Werewolf in my head a little bit, you know, knowing everything. I mean, just being too tied to it. And then I went back, rewatched it, and I'm like, man, this is really like more memorable than I remember the first time. And then I think a couple years ago, really seeing it in theaters again, where, you know, my big thing, and I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on the podcast before, is I love being in a theater because your friends aren't talking, no one should be talking, your phone's off, you're just canceled out the rest of the world, you're focused on what's in front of you. And watching The Howling in a theater, I walked out and I'm like, fuck, that was a masterpiece. I know we like to throw that term around sometimes, but I mean, just for the most part, different werewolf story. The fact that there are multiple werewolves in it, which obviously, or a little bit of spoil. I mean, if you're listening, there's gonna be some spoilers. We always say that, but you should know that. Multiple werewolves. I mean, just kind of like a weird, unnatural, supernatural element towards the whole back half of the film. It's a big horror fans film. There's a lot of little cameos from horror icons in it. There's a lot of researching werewolves. They actually, one of the people that works at the news station starts to research about lycanthropes and everything about that.
Yeah.
Which I think is great. You know what I mean? Like, I know that that's a bit that gets used to death in modern horror films, but the problem is with the editing of modern horror films, they show you all that in a 90-second clip. You know, they're researching online, classic researching on the internet. No, this guy's going to obscure bookstores and doing stuff. He's reading texts and tomes and buying things. Goes back and buys silver bullets. And, like, so, like, there's all these, like, great, funny scenes of him doing all this. Incredible practical effects. I mean, the more I've watched this, it's a different kind of werewolf than the werewolf in American Werewolf in London, but if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I wouldn't agree, but I would put the practical effects on par with American Werewolf in London, especially because honestly there's more, I'm going to say, at least it feels this way, there's more on-screen time with the werewolves in The Howling than there is in American Werewolf in London. Even though I feel like the werewolves are shown enough in American Werewolf in London, but it's hard because there are other, like, let's say there's other monsters, there's other monsters, there's other big effects, you know.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's talk about how you feel about a little bit. I mean, before I go
So
back
again, I haven't seen it in like 12, 13 years, but it is one, like, as I just said, it just popped up on Shudder. It's one that it's ironic that you said that, because it was one I was like, oh, I should rewatch that, because the series, like, I've seen not all of them, but I've seen like random ones. Like, I've seen 1, 3, 4, and 7. That's the one we just watched, the Bad Moon Rising or whatever. Is that 7?
Wait.
Or is it 6?
It is 7. That's the one where it wasn't even a Howling film. They just kind of tagged parts in, and it was almost like a weird Australian town drama, and then they just like put some werewolf parts in. But the Howling series is probably one of the oddest franchises. Like, honestly, of anything that's like, I would say the Howling series it's weird because they had a bunch of, like, you used to go to FYE, you could find any, like, they used to have like copies and copies of Howling 3 randomly, and like Howling 4, or like 4-packs of some of those. But I feel like you never really meet anyone that's watched all of them or talks about any of them for the most part. It's weird. They're so disconnected. Like, honestly, you could rename all of them and not put them in a Howling franchise.
Right, like, there's no, like, real characters that are... So, they actually put... They must have put a bunch of werewolf shit on this month. Yeah, because they just added Ginger Snaps 1 and 2, American Werewolf in London, Howling...
Great, we're all great.
Howling 2 as well.
Howling 2 is very good.
See, I haven't seen it. That's one that's eluded me.
You should see, too. Me and Jared, Dynamite Jared, watched that together years ago for the first time. Both of our first times. We both were big fans of that. Do a good double feature. Do one and two. I mean, 1 and 2, you know, I know we always, a lot of franchises say the first couple are the best, but in this regard, I think the best ones are Howling 1, 2, and then Freaks, which is 6. Freaks, when I watched it, I was blown away how good it was. But it's another very different story, you know, which I think that helps. But so you think you're gonna watch Howling, huh? I highly recommend it. I highly recommend rewatching it if you can.
Yeah, I might rewatch it soon.
I feel like another one, I'm going to talk probably about pacing and stuff like this, but another one, like, once it starts, to me, I'm never once bored. I mean, it just kind of keeps up everything. It does a really good job pacing. It lets scenes breathe just enough to get the story across and, like, live in the film, but not to the extent where American Werewolf in London is, again, I've said it before, top 10 of all time of everything. I appreciate how long it lets scenes go, because it does. I mean, they're walking out in the middle of nowhere for an extended period of time. They're in the bar for an extended, like, you really live in the moment, and there's almost like a slow underlying tension, especially throughout the first 20 minutes. But I often wonder how modern audiences would feel about, if that would be one that modern audiences would pick up on more. I feel like if I showed, let's say, a 16-year-old kid American Werewolf in London and then The Howling, I feel like the way that the story's paced, how odd the story is, and everything, I feel like they might gravitate more towards The Howling in modern times.
Depends what they're looking for. Like, if they're looking for more, like, straight up horror, yeah. Because, I mean, like, to be honest, like, American Werewolf in London, it has those horror elements, but again, it might be one where, like, you're waiting for the werewolf to show up. Like, it's like, okay, we're seeing his friend is, like, a zombie ghost, and then all of a sudden the house is getting raided because he's having, like, these nightmares, and, like, it's fucking, like, cartoon, like, Dick Tracy stuff where, like, shooting with the machine guns. Like, I feel like, unless you're in a certain mindset, and again, I don't know, like, what Gen Z or, like, Generation Alpha now, like, what they're, like, looking for in a film, but they might feel that that's kind of, like we've said it a few times, they might feel it's kind of, like, disjointed. Like, even though it is, like, all cohesive, they might be sitting there like, oh, I thought I was watching a werewolf movie.
Yeah, again, I agree. I don't know. I don't really. I guess my coworker's daughter, she's really gotten into horror. I actually had an extra copy, Evil Dead 2013. I gave it to her. She actually showed up the other day. Was talking about. She loves both Terrifiers and stuff, and she's seen a lot. She actually came in and was talking to me about horror, and I'm like, oh, cool. That's cool. You know, I mean, that's why I gave that to her, because I'm like trying to coach the next generation. You know what I mean?
Side note, they just announced Terrifier 3.
Yes.
They're like quadrupling the budget.
Yeah.
And I would assume the runtime is going to be much longer too. So I don't know what to expect from the runtime, but effects wise, like, I'm beyond stoked.
Yeah, it's going to be. I don't even understand truthfully. And it's how much the times have changed, even within the past decade. I've told the story on this podcast about how Hatchet 2 was supposed to be the first unrated film in theaters at, like, a wide release since, I think, Day of the Dead, if I'm remembering right, and how it got ripped from theaters when I was going to go see it after being in theaters for 2 days. Somehow Terrifier 2
was widely embraced.
It was in theaters for nearly 3 weeks, and it had some of the most fucking crazy gore scenes that I've ever seen in the world. So I'm wondering how far they're going to push the envelope, and how, like, I hope it's not one that's going to get severely cut now that the popularity has hit like another level. We'll see. I'm very curious to see what happens with it, you know?
Yeah.
But anyways, that made me think about that. If I were to show her American Werewolf in London or The Howling, what someone would gravitate. I think it's like an interesting conversation as you think about the legacy of horror, the legacy of things, and like they aren't growing up with TV channels playing stuff from like 10 or 15 years ago, and then 10 15 years ago for us would have been maybe, you know, the mid to early 80s or things like that. Now, you know, with everything with streaming and stuff like that, you can just bypass all that. Like you know, maybe their parents have Shudder, but Shudder has a bunch of new releases all the time. Yeah. Maybe they see The Howling, they just keep scrolling by. They have no idea the legacy, no idea what it is. I mean, I'm very curious to see as we get older and maybe still go to some of these conventions or listen to some of these things, what people are really talking about or what's going to stand the test of time, you know?
Yeah. All right, so moving on to my second one, I guess.
Yeah.
This is one that I've seen. I think the last time I rewatched, I think it was my third time seeing it. First time I watched it, I think I was too young. Like, I thought it was boring. I couldn't get into it. Second time I watched it was midway through college, and it just wasn't the right environment to be watching a film like this. Because when you're watching, like, a film with, like, a bunch of your buddies and stuff, and, like, as you said, people are talking or whatever, you kind of want a film you can, like, laugh at and, like, party to, and this wasn't, like, a film that was like that. But finally watching it as an adult, by myself, a film that really lived up to the hype that it has gained over the past 50 years, I thought Wicker Man was a masterpiece.
Wicker Man's very good, yeah. I agree.
And it sort of falls into a genre of film that has been sort of like a guilty pleasure of mine over the past few years, that I've really been getting into, is like weird, like, not like necessarily super low budget, but like mid to low budget 70s films. Like one of my favorite films of all time, one that you still need to see, The Night Stalker, absolute masterpiece. Gave me a lot of similar vibes to that. For those of you who haven't seen Wicker Man, it's about an inspector who's going to this very strange town overseas, and he's trying to search for the disappearance of this missing girl. Of course, no one in the town has heard of her before, but her, like, mother's there. It's like, how does your child just go missing and you're not going to bat an eye at it? And just the way the whole mystery unfolds, and even if you know the ending and you know what's coming, it's about the journey, not the destination. Just phenomenal writing, phenomenal atmosphere, acting is incredible, and again, it's just a similar, like, vibe to films that I've really liked over the past few years. Like, even when I was over at your house and you were watching, like, a random, like, biker movie from, like, the 60s and stuff, and you're like, oh, this isn't that great, and I'm, like, watching it for a half hour, like, this is a masterpiece. Because it's just like, just something about that aesthetic has, like, really been, like, coming at me these past few years, where it's just, like, I'm really just, like, gravitating films that look and feel like this.
I like, again, that was She Devil on Wheels, by the way, for anyone that was curious what I was watching. But, I did like She Devil on Wheels. I just think that, you know, classic marketing at the time, you know, I mean, it definitely has a little bit more hype than maybe is deserved. But the thing is, it's such an oddity that it's like, you have to appreciate. It's like something in me appreciates it for what it is, because something like that nowadays just, it would never feel or look the same. I mean, in that film, there were some very early practical effects that actually even shocked me at the end that they did that. I didn't think they were going to show a couple things. But I'm with you on the whole aesthetic from, you know, kind of like, I would say, the beginning of the hippie movement all the way, you know, throughout the 70s, before things obviously began to change in the early 80s a lot.
Yeah.
But No, I'm a big fan of stuff from that era too. I think that's a lot of reason we talk. I talked about Cinema Wasteland here. I go to Cinema Wasteland because they will show a lot of like
Be the perfect
obscure
Cinema
70s
Wasteland
stuff.
movie. Yeah,
I agree.
Like,
I 100% agree. It's been. I have seen The Wicker Man, I believe, 3 times, but I believe it's probably been 6 or 7 years since I seen it last. That's one that so you said the first time you watched it with people.
First time I watched it like as like not a kid, but like junior high, early high school era. So like then you're not gonna be really entertained by like basically a police procedural like on this town, but like. And then again in college, like we did like our Monster Madness thing where we would watch like a movie every day, but like we're basically like in a frat house, so like that's not really something. But I'm like, all right, we want to watch fucking like Dead Alive or whatever. Like it just doesn't like fit into the vibe of like what we were going for. But just watching it like by myself, like I could totally get into it. And maybe like part of it like makes it better because I've not seen the Nicolas Cage version. I'm sure
I saw that in theaters. Actually.
Like I'm sure it's like very entertaining in a completely different way. And then Midsummer, which is basically like the modern equivalent to like a Wicker Man type story.
Yeah.
Which I also was not the biggest fan of. So maybe it's just kind of again the whole hindsight thing, like Wicker Man. I guess it is actually pretty great, but I don't know. There was just something about it where I was like, the first few times I saw it, I didn't think it was that great, but then finally seeing it like as an adult, I was like, okay, this is actually like really good.
I agree. No, yeah. I mean, I've seen it again. I watched it. It's weird because I think the second time I watched it, I also watched it with a couple people, but they appreciate film. But it was in like a really brightly lit room, and I just think a little. So I kind of get that where we all liked it and it was good, but there was obviously some talking in there, and it just wasn't quite the right atmosphere. But I have watched it alone. I'd like to. That's definitely one that I've thought about. Obviously, with the whole kind of trend of folk horror a little bit, but I think also people trying to discover folk horror. I mean, stuff like that. Putting that in there, that I've kind of wanted to go back and rewatch just because of, I don't know. It's not really a trend, but a little bit of a trend or an interest, I will say, because of Midsummer and things like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a good like starter film for like folk horror.
Yeah.
I guess, or like even horror that like I said is more like a mystery, like trying to figure out. Like I would definitely say watch Wicker Man before you watch something like The Night Stalker. Like I said, but like. Even, like if you like Wicker Man, you could dive even deeper and like watch like Eyes of Fire and like stuff like that, like all these like folk. And again, Shudder's a great tool for stuff like that.
Well, they have that documentary that was put out.
That's like 5 hours long. I still haven't started it.
Yeah, I've wanted to watch that, and that was on. I'm surprised they actually put that on streaming because I believe Severin Films, because they send me emails like. Maybe 2 years ago said they were going to put out that documentary, and then some of the films that were mentioned, like how you just mentioned, on video, on Blu-ray for the first time. Kind of surprised they kind of threw it up on streaming because they made a big deal about the pre-orders and the amount of copies and stuff like that.
Well, I thought the same thing too, but then now all the In Search of Darkness movies are on Shudder too.
I did see. I haven't watched all those either.
I've seen the first 2. I haven't seen the third one yet. But yeah, I mean, that's my pick for the second one. Not like as much to say about it. Just really good, solid.
That's a good. It's a good recommendation. It's a good
I think
recommendation.
the 70s in general is just kind of like overlooked.
I
guess
1000% agree. I had an argument with your boy Jared about. I actually argue that the overall quality of the horror films and some of the horror adjacent films in the 70s was better than the 80s. I'm talking about overall. Not because they're serious, but I think like the writing, maybe some of the directing, things like that. Some things that are.
Well, in the 80s, you're in the era where anyone can make a horror movie. So, like, there's just a lot more stuff. So, like, really, like, if you're comparing it, like.
It's a hard comparison.
Like, yeah, it's, like, totally different, so.
But but then I had to, school and be like, well, Halloween's one of your favorite films. That came out in 1978. And then I started naming off some things, and he was like, oh, and I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, we all love shit like, Friday the 13th, part whatever, but it's not in the same caliber as The Exorcist as far as quality of film or something like that.
I almost like catch myself in like when you're like having this discussion. I always want to throw The Shining into 70s, even then I remember it was 1980.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they shot it in the 70s, obviously.
Yeah.
Like,
The Shining's that weird film is a weird film for me because I never really think about like when it was released or when it's just like it's just The Shining. Like it's almost in its own little box. Like I don't think about it like like when Jaws came out or when The Exorcist came out or when Texas Chainsaw. It's like oh yeah, where was The Shining in the middle of all? You know what I mean? Like it's strange to me. That's just a little thing in my mind that I don't know. Also, huge Shining fan, by the way, but maybe that goes without saying. But good picks. I'm the very good picks. I didn't know what to expect from you, but I'm digging it so far. Should I go to my number 3?
Yeah, take us home with your number 3.
Take us home, huh?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so this one I did not... I'll do some classic Miles shit on this one, though. You'll get a good kick out of that. But this one I did not put any bullet points or do too much.
That's okay, man. I've had 0 bullet points.
I know, and you're fucking killing it, so there you go. I put Poltergeist, actually.
Okay.
Poltergeist was one that I feel like as a kid, pre-internet, when you're just getting into horror, there was like, depending, I guess, on what you're exposed to, but there was a little bit of like, I remember reading some stuff or like hearing some stuff or seeing it at the video store, like little bit of hype around it. Especially being like, because I would read a lot and reading the backs of stuff and like knowing who Tobe Hooper was. That I think Tobe Hooper honestly was one of the first directors I remembered like their name and knew who they were what he was associated with as far as Texas Chainsaw and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which were 2 very early films that I talked about in detail my love for those on this podcast before, but wondering how him and Steven Spielberg would get along to make a very different film than what Texas Chainsaw and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 are, obviously.
It was a weird sort of thing because it was more mainstream than what Tobe Hooper was used to, and it was more indie than what Spielberg was doing.
Yes.
Like, it was kind of like a return to form for Spielberg, because, again, I mean, he had to start in horror with Duel and Jaws and stuff like that. But, I mean, at that point, he's doing E.T., Indiana Jones, stuff like that. So, like,
he done Close Encounters.
So this, like, I feel like it was sort of like Spielberg doing, like, okay, I still got it, like, in this regard, like, with, in terms of, like, an actual, like, horror audience. And Tobe Hooper trying to make that next big step, I guess.
I know the big thing. It's a weird film because I know the big thing was like there was the director's strike or whatever at the time, and everyone thinks that Steven Spielberg actually directed this and Tobe Hooper didn't. But maybe, if we're being honest, maybe both of them directed it, because there's things that I see in the film that I'm like,
that's
Spielberg
so
would
Spielberg.
Never. Yeah, well,
like
exactly.
There's some stuff that's so Spielberg, and there's some stuff there's no way
he would do this. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, but the odd thing is, it all works. We used the word disjointed earlier in the podcast. I don't feel that this film, especially after these rewatches, and I saw this in theaters again last October. They brought it back to theaters, which I thought was great. I don't feel that this is disjointed, but if you put some things down on paper, I don't see Spielberg doing some of the things that were done. But I mean, obviously there was some influence. I think that there's probably a bunch of stuff that no one will ever talk about, that we'll never know. It's all hearsay. I mean, I'm sure that there were some times where Hooper did something and Spielberg and him sat and talked about it after. Maybe they even took a break on set, and I mean, there was probably maybe more influence than there needed to be.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I'm sure that's not a stretch of the imagination. I'm sure. I mean, Spielberg being one of the biggest directors in the world as far as mainstream at that point, I'm sure that there was some influence and control over the film. I mean, we're not, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also protecting, like, the Spielberg brand.
Exactly.
So, like, you can't do anything that's super off the wall. I mean, you're talking about the guy who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Like that. Which is not, like, that gory or extreme or anything, but, like...
The subject matter at the time for a mainstream film was pretty extreme. You know what I mean? Especially when you think about some of the shows that were on TV at the time and things. I mean, like, society, all of a sudden it's like, cannibal family cutting people up and throwing them in freezers and on meat hooks. Like, holy fuck, I mean... but I know what you're saying. I don't want to undermine you in that. I mean, there's not a ton of gore, things like that, but the subject, subject matter and what actually happens, I mean, but really liked Poltergeist, but I think I had seen it in between some other Spielberg films, and also hadn't seen all of Tobe Hooper's work at that point. I think when I saw Poltergeist, I had seen Texas Chainsaw 1, 2, and Salem's Lot. Hadn't seen Funhouse yet. Hadn't seen Eaten Alive, which I think Eaten Alive is ridiculously underrated in my opinion. Have you seen Eaten Alive?
I have not, but you talk about it constantly.
Yeah, you need to see Eaten Alive. In a weird way, I know we'll go into the film a little bit. I want to get your reactions and stuff after this, but in a weird way, Poltergeist kind of killed... It was kind of the peak of Tobe Hooper's career and kind of fucked up the rest of his career. But, I mean, to be honest... Well, it's strange because, okay, so he did that, and then he got a 3-picture deal to do whatever he wanted. 3 guaranteed films. So, as a director, you're like, fuck, I mean, I made it. I'm done. Like, I'm fucking... Especially at the time. So he got this deal, I think, like 82 or something. He's like, well, I just basically mapped out the rest of my 80s for the most part. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, it's shit's going to be great. I made it, And never saw the box office return they thought he would on these films. I know that he had a lot of personal problems after that. And it just seems like he never, by the early 90s, he still worked. And I actually think his later films are good for what they are, and they're underrated in some extent, but he never is remembered again in the upper echelon with like Carpenter or Craven, But yeah, some thoughts and opinions on Poltergeist.
So, I haven't seen it since I was a kid, and I mean like a kid.
Yeah.
And I guess I wasn't too hot on it. Like, I thought it was fine. Like, I thought it was a very fine film. I think part of the problem was I had seen Poltergeist right after I saw a Poltergeist parody.
Oh.
Because every year, and I still do this to this day, I'm not the biggest fan of the show overall, but every year it's a tradition to me to watch the Treehouse of Horror episode of The Simpsons.
Okay.
So, The Simpsons had their phenomenal Poltergeist parody.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was even like, because like Family Guy did a Poltergeist parody too.
Yeah.
So like it was one of those where like I had just seen that like early on in my childhood and then watched Poltergeist and I was like, well, I like the fucking Family Guy episode better than the film. But I don't know. So like Poltergeist is not one that I've really been drawn back to. I mean, it's a film that I've definitely, like, looked into and, like, studied, because, like, I found out it was, like, a quote-unquote cursed film, like, they used real skeletons and stuff like that, and then there's the whole, like, unfortunate stuff that, like, happened with the girl and all that, and the lightning strikes, and all the terrible, terrible things that happened after Poltergeist, which they talk about in the documentary Cursed Films, which is also on Shudder.
I need to watch that, yeah.
Season 2 is better than Season 1. They cover better films in Season 1.
Okay.
But Season 2 is much better, like, more well-made. My wife is in the house now. If you heard the door, but that's fine. But yeah, I'm open to rewatching Poltergeist at some point in my life. But it's not something that I've really been, like, drawn to rewatching, I guess.
Last year, I think that they put like Jaws, E.T., and Poltergeist in theaters again, which is strange because you think they would have done that more at the beginning of the pandemic when they were doing that with a bunch of shit. But they put those three. I went and saw all three again in theaters. Jaws is another that's up there. I will say, I'm not going to get too far off topic, but it's still on topic enough as we're talking about this era and these directors, producers. I was never a huge E.T. guy growing up. You know, I feel like that was one of the ones that was pushed down your throat as a kid when you'd see a lot of commercials or it'd be on late night TV.
I've never seen E.T. all the way through.
Wow. Okay, all right.
Well, like, I've talked about this. I don't know if I've talked about this on the show, but I've talked about this in real life. Like, I'm the oldest in my family. I didn't have any, like, older, like, siblings or, like, cousins I was close with to, like, show you, like, E.T., Goonies, stuff like that. Like, Never Ending Story. I've never really seen, like, any of those.
Oh, wow.
Like, because, like, my parents, like, they were adults when those came out. So, like, they're not going to be like, hey, son, watch this. This is good. Like, they never really saw it either.
Yeah.
So, like, I get the gist of E.T. I've never seen the whole thing, but
man, really recommend. So when I went back and watched E.T. this time, another one, I was blown away at how much. Not that because I liked it before, but I always, I don't want to say I thought it was overrated, but when you're young and all this stuff, you're like, whatever, it's E.T. It's especially I didn't like stuff that was like too geared towards possibly like children and stuff like that, even when I was young. But man, E.T. really like hit home. It was good. Like I really enjoyed it. I finally I actually re-ranked it. I think I gave it like a 4.5 or 5 stars because it actually hit something about Spielberg produced, as we're talking about Poltergeist films. Now that I've gotten like some ones I've went back and rewatched them now that I'm older. I guess I would say his 80s fare because Close Encounters and Jaws are two of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
But like going back and rewatching Poltergeist, which you're talking about in E.T., I just realized how good these films are and like how much I enjoyed the humor, the scares, the story. I think some of it now, because there's so many filmmakers that have ripped them off or done influencer-inspired stories. I think maybe, I don't know with you, but maybe even turned some people off from going back and watching the originals because they've seen so many of the, I don't know, copycats or influence films or things like that. They're like, why do I need to, why would I go back and watch that old, especially if they're younger, you know what I mean? But I would recommend to you, I want to talk about Poltergeist a little bit more before we wrap it up, but going back and rewatching both of those, Poltergeist, there's just some really good scares with the family. I think the thing that drove both of those that made them better is how believable and how good the acting was in both of those films, the families, about how terrified they were, how much they were using the family to try to get through this tragedy, whatever it may be, between the two, and how they were trying to adapt to a situation that was changing rapidly around them and getting out of their control. I think there's some great storytelling and great moments in both of these. Poltergeist, I like a little bit more because of being more horror, horror influence, horror adjacent. I mean, like you said, scenes of the skeletons coming in, the tree, all the stuff with the tree on these rewatches I've enjoyed more, and then like putting myself into the kid's shoes and like things like that.
Yeah.
the scene with the face getting ripped apart in the mirror and stuff like that. I mean, that's just phenomenal. I mean, there's stuff that I see in it each time, especially the chemistry, I would say, between the mother and father. Especially when I don't remember the mother being so hot when I was young with this last time. And she's supposed to be 30 in the film, and I'm just like, holy shit, I'm older than the parents supposedly in Poltergeist now. But my God, mom looks great. I don't know what, but I was blown away this last time. But I don't know if it's because maybe even because I'm getting closer to that age. You know what I mean? And I'm like seeing things a little differently, or seeing things that a little bit. I don't know if I'm any smarter, but a little more experienced, a little more lived in, I guess I'd say, where I see all these nuances in the films and little subtleties that really I'm like, oh, this is why these are classics, or deemed true classics at the time.
Yeah.
What do you think? Anything? You got anything?
No, like as I said, I mean, everything you've said, like I definitely, like, it's one that I would be down to rewatch. It's not something I have the greatest experience with it. Like, I'm not as familiar with it. Like, I know everything that happens in the film. Have not seen the remake. I heard that was terrible. I was working at the video store when that hit.
I got a
shelves.
free ticket to it, and I watched it. And I mean, I know the basic story, but I can't remember almost anything about it. I can't even remember what the actors looked like, to be honest. I don't know who even was fucking cast in it. I might later. I'm not gonna do it while we're on air, but maybe go back and just like look. I'm like, oh, that's who was in it, on Letterboxd later tonight. But I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I think as someone who loves film and horror and all these things as much as you, I think I don't know. My 2 cents, whatever, but watch E.T. once and then rewatch.
Watch E.T. once. Watch it through all the way.
It's kind of a crazy thing to say. Oh, just watch E.T. Like, you haven't seen it. It's just like, it's interesting to do these podcasts. You figure out what we have and haven't seen. I mean, it's interesting, but
yeah, I understand. I guess for my last one that I will talk about, it's a film that at the first time I watched it, I thought it was just wildly overhyped. Didn't get it because I had heard people talking about it since it came out when I was in first grade. And I heard people talking about how crazy it was at the time and how you shouldn't see it because it was so scary and it was so real. And I remember watching it and just being incredibly underwhelmed. And now it's been a film that I've sort of been obsessing over rewatching. And I brought this up to you the other day as well.
I already knew it. As soon as you said your age and what it was, I already knew what it was.
Blair Witch Project.
Masterpiece.
So, again, this has been the topic with all of mine, with it being about hindsight. Because, and especially after seeing so many found footage films, like, recently. Like this year I watched all the Hell House LLC movies and stuff like that. Okay. Like, I've been really getting into found footage a lot. I mean, obviously Paranormal Activity was huge in my life. I rewatched The Last Broadcast, which that one was actually brought down a little bit for me from the first time I saw it. But like Blair Witch, like,
did you rewatch Megan's Missing?
I've not rewatched Megan's Missing.
Anyway, sorry.
But it's just a film that, like, again, like, for the vibe and the aesthetic of it, like, I was pitching you the idea. My elevator pitch for Miles via Instagram direct message is bringing a TV, because I have a TV CR now, like, bringing it outside with an extension cord and watching Blair Witch Project, like, with a fire going. I think it would be, like, the most perfect. I can't think of a better summer night than that. It's just a film that, like, I guess, like, over time, I realized how much I actually did like it. And I could rewatch it again and be like, oh, like, like, these are just all, like, what's the word I'm thinking of in my head? Like, I can't think of the word to describe it, but, maybe I'm over glamorizing it, I guess. But, like, for some reason, it's just like, oh, like, I guess I actually did like that one. And I've seen Blair Witch 2. I like Blair Witch 2 for what it is. I think that's one where you got to get a group of friends together and watch it and just have a good time.
I absolutely love Blair Witch. I've always been very pro Blair Witch Project. I think it's great. I love what it is. I love the idea of it. All the crazy shit with the marketing at the time and stuff like that. Oh, they made a whole website devoted to trying to make it real and you know what I mean? It's genius. It'll never be done, never to be able to be done again because of the way the internet and the way media has changed. Huge Blair Witch fan. Blair Witch is one, speaking of this podcast too, that's become a semi-annual rewatch. I think any time either I make a new friend or possibly have a new relationship or something like that, there's certain things that I pull out. It's almost always Return of the Living Dead, Blair Witch, and then SLC Punk seems to be one. That's awful, but
that's what I need to go back and rewatch.
SLC Punk is, to me, I don't know. There's just something about it. I know it's corny. I know it's cheesy. But I watched that semi-annual rewatch. I've watched it this year. I actually watched, I was going to say not only Return of the Living Dead, but Return of the Living Dead Part 3. I just showed Shelby that on Friday night.
You've rewatched that a lot because we just watched part of that together.
Last year?
Last year? It was not too long ago.
Yeah, I think it was
and
last fall.
You're like, hey, Kat, you want to watch the last half hour of Returning to the Living Dead Part 3? I was like, all right, bet.
I love it. I'm a big Returning Dead Part 3 fan, but there's just a handful that, I show people that I feel like, if you want to watch shit with me or you want to be with me or this or that, like, if you can get through these core things, then you're all right. And but
yeah,
Blair Witch, yeah, no, I agree, everything you're saying.
But it was like literally, I'm sitting in class in first grade, and like our teacher is like warning us to like not watch it. Like they're telling this to first graders.
Yeah.
And like one of the kids in my class was like, "Oh, well, I saw it with my parents and I liked it and stuff like that." And like for some reason, like I think my teacher like actually thought it was like supposed to be real or something. Like I don't know.
Well, because they did that marketing thing that they tried to make it seem like that, But
I guess like people actually like bought into it,
yeah,
which is like kind of like
yeah.
mind blowing to me. Like,
yeah, it was such a different time though. When we were young, it's hard to remember what that was actually like. But I mean, if you really think about Blair Witch and everything that came out around it, think about Blair Witch coming out 3 years after Scream, or shit like I Know What You Did Last Summer coming out in theaters and stuff like that. Or fucking like Independence Day or things, and then all of a sudden you just get something. It's called The Blair Witch and it's in theaters. It's completely different than anything else that come out around the time, especially in the mainstream of all things.
Yeah. Again, I don't really have as much to like say about it. Like it's stuff that, I mean, and I've been thinking about it a lot more too because now there's all those like fan theories that have been online. It's like, oh, like what if the guys like planned it like the whole time and it was actually like the guy's plot to kill the girl and there was no Blair Witch at all, and like they mapped out the whole thing where it's like, oh well, they did this because the guys were trying to hide the map and they did things in this way to make it like not seem supernatural at all. Like there's a lot of like really good like video essays and like stuff out there that you can watch that like sort of break all that down. But that's one that like I'd like to like watch it outside and like even like do a show like after it, be like, okay, this is how that went, because again, that's another one that I haven't really watched in the correct environment, and I think that's the perfect environment to sort of do it. So,
I agree.
And now that for some reason I have like 3 copies of it on VHS, I don't know how, but like I don't know if it's just like an easy one to get, because like if I'm buying like stuff in like a lot or like whatever, like I feel like a copy of like Blair Witch is like always there, right? But like for some reason I own like 3 copies of Blair Witch, so like I'm hoping one of them actually plays pretty decently.
I might even have a copy of it on VHS. I'd have to look. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd really like to do that. I something that we had talked about before, but kind of in the same vein, but I'd like to do like a live commentary or almost like a watch along, just see how it goes, because we've never done anything like that.
We'd probably have to do it with a public domain film so I don't get sued.
True.
But hey, Night of the Living Dead, something like that. We could do. What else is public domain?
I thought about doing one that neither of us had ever seen before, so we're having live reactions, just talking about it. You know what I mean? Like something that maybe the conversation would get pretty interesting. You know what I mean? Maybe a little more critical.
No, like I've done for cheap plug for podcasts I've done years ago, but like I've done a commentary of White Zombie, I've done a commentary of Nosferatu. So it's stuff I've done before, never with someone. So I think that could actually help, because like for a lot of it, it's just like, all right, what am I going to talk about for an hour and a half while I watch this movie? And it's like, when do I talk? When do I not talk? Because I like Nosferatu, I could talk the whole time because there was no sound. But but yeah, I'd totally be down to do like a commentary. We'd have to figure out what we would want to do. But
we'll have to do a little bit of planning, a little behind the scenes. But yeah, any final thoughts on any of this, or?
No, I think the audience has a solid watch list for any of these that they haven't seen. And maybe if you guys are listening to this and you have time to submit some stuff that you've seen recently, that either one way or the other, stuff that has really changed your opinion on in a positive way or a negative way, because the next one we're going to be doing the negative episode. So definitely get in touch with us. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know if our opinions are completely wrong or if you agree with what we said. And let us know what we should do a commentary of.
Yeah, put it, if you guys have any ideas, definitely put it out there. I really liked your picks, so I think they were good. I mean, honestly, I would highly recommend a very good varied list, I'd like to say, as a final thought from me. That was like, you know what I mean? Like, you think about Night of the Demons on one, Wicker Man on the other. I mean, such different ends of the spectrum as far as like what you could actually watch. Even stuff that like borderlines into like critically acclaimed mainstream stuff with Poltergeist and even, you know, E.T.
We didn't come in with super obscure ones. Like, I feel like all these are like relatively well known, so they're easy to get your hands on. So I think if any of you guys want to check these out, they're easily accessible. So it's not something you're gonna have to be like, oh, like it's out of print on DVD or some shit. Like most of these, like you guys are able to find. So let us know what your guys' thoughts are on these. Thanks for coming on the show, Kat. Thanks for coming up with the idea for this show and the next couple shows. We're gonna try to get a few out up until October, like maybe a couple a month or something like that, just to kind of hold you guys over until I come out with another 31, hopefully.
Well, I'm excited to do a few. I think that I like that we don't know what each other's picks are going to be going into this. That's what I enjoy the most, the spontaneousness of that. But yeah, thank you for having me on. I look forward to it. I really do look forward to when we can announce what franchise we're watching. And to be honest, we gotta get on.
I was gonna say we need to start. We need to start watching them like a month ago.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Honestly, yeah, that's true. So I guess we're gonna let you guys go, so maybe we can actually think about watching these damn films. But thanks again, buddy. I appreciate it for having me on. I will see you soon. So
we'll see you guys next time. Miles and I are gonna plan out our next movie marathon. So I'll catch you guys in the outro. Well, that's about it for this time, you guys. I hope you enjoyed the films that have grown on us over the years, the films that we may have changed our opinions on, and films that we really, really want to rewatch in the near future if we haven't already. Again, I want to remind you guys, if you haven't, to please subscribe to my channel. Wherever you're listening to the show, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get the show, make sure you're spreading the good word of Buddy's House of Horror, leaving a like, sharing it with a friend. It really means a lot to me, you guys. And with that, we're going to come at you very soon with another episode in the near future. So with that, take care and stay spooky.